G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. ABC Radio is going to talk about Barnaby Joyce's election victory. We'll see what they've got to say.
It is now 9:08 on our end. Now, one of the major news headlines this morning is the landslide victory of Barnaby Joyce in the New England by-election. The Deputy Prime Minister had lost his seat after being caught up in the dual citizenship issue. But with a projected 64% primary vote, it does look like Mr. Joyce is well and truly back in federal parliament. National Affairs correspondent Greg Jennett is on the line with us to break it down for us. Good morning to you, Greg.
Good morning.
Now, Joyce's victory was expected, but was the overwhelming support expected? He's projected to win a primary vote of about 64%. So before we actually get into what this actually means federally, what does this actually say about the candidate, Barnaby Joyce?
Well, it turns the tide on recent by-election history. Whether it turns the tide or not on the Turnbull government's fortunes, I suppose we'll have to wait and see. But what it says is that in not having a formidable opponent, let's say someone like Tony Windsor, then Barnaby Joyce had a fairly open run at a seat, with really the only contestants being very low profile and not even local candidates in some cases. There was one who blew in from Western Australia to try his luck. On the presumption, I imagine, that by-elections usually produce swings against sitting members. Well, Barnaby Joyce wasn't a sitting member necessarily because he had to resign it, but nevertheless, he has pulled an extraordinary result from a local campaign. He eschewed national media coverage. A few crews from Canberra showed up occasionally, but generally he focused absolutely on the local community, and it seems to have paid off in droves.
Yeah, it was quite a low-profile campaign. I think many of us were quite taken aback by that. But now coalition members are claiming that Barnaby Joyce's win as a boost for the federal government. The question, though, is this a win for the coalition or a vote of confidence for Barnaby Joyce in New England?
Probably more the latter, I suspect. And if there is a vote of confidence there for some entity as a party, it's probably the Nationals, who increasingly since last weekend and what happened to the LNP as a merged entity in Queensland, it's obviously the intent of Nationals within the federal parliament to put their brand out more prominently to distinguish themselves from their Liberal colleagues. So to the extent that that happened in New England, it was successful for Barnaby Joyce, and you would certainly expect in 18 months' time or so, when other Nationals in northern New South Wales and elsewhere, when they campaign, they'll be campaigning, as Nationals rather than as coalition members, because it's perceived at present that that is a stronger brand.
Now, this result, of course, would be a relief for Prime Minister Turnbull. You can virtually see the relief on his face when standing next to Barnaby Joyce. But given the unpopularity ratings that he's facing right now, what does this election result actually mean for Mr. Turnbull? And particularly keeping in mind the calls for him to resign by Christmas.
Yeah, I hate to use the word vibe, but I suppose the vibe is probably one of relief for Malcolm Turnbull. There's not very much he can take from a one-off by-election. I don't think that this result means a lot for, let's say, the Bennelong by-election in a fortnight's time. That is a much tougher contest, more candidates, a tougher opponent in Christina Keneally. But, the vibe is that he's had a horrible week, and if he can just put in his back pocket a sign of victory, that being a Barnaby Joyce win in New England, predictable though it might have been, then at least the feeling is that you might have punctuated this bad week and roll into your final week of Parliament with something of the momentum in your sails. Now, a few things need to happen for this week to go well. One is for restless backbenchers, particularly Nats and LNP members from Queensland, to settle down. They got their Banking Royal Commission, so they can pull it back a bit. Look, Malcolm Turnbull will take any win at the moment. I don't know that this turns the tide necessarily for him, but he'll take it nonetheless.
Now, as you mentioned, all eyes are on the Bennelong by-election. That's on December 16th. You mentioned two Liberal candidate, John Alexander, facing tough competition in Labor candidate Christina Keneally. Talk to us about how that race is actually shaping up.
Yeah, so there's much more high-profile involvement by the respective party leaders there as well. So Malcolm Turnbull has made visits, two that I'm aware of. Bill Shorten, at least two. I think many more than that, several more than that. So you would expect that to continue over the coming weeks. The profile of that seat is infinitely more complex than it is in New England, for instance. There are ethnic constituencies to serve. There are distinct local issues like transport, like housing, prices, etc. So it's a contested by-election, that one, in every sense of the word. Now, John Alexander on the maths should enter as favourite. All he has done through 3 federal elections now is gradually increase the margin from what was super marginal when he first took it through to, today he's on 59% of the primary vote. You would expect, following conventional logic, that will diminish in a by-election, but he nevertheless, even against a formidable opponent like Christina Keneally, would be expected to be the favourite at this point in time.
Right. Now, that by-election, of course, was triggered by the dual citizenship issue, and the deadline for politicians to declare their citizenship status is 8 p.m. December 5th. That's this Tuesday. Are you expecting to see more politicians fall?
Yeah, that gets really complex from that time onwards. There's a few things that need to happen, all set against a ticking clock, which is the parliamentary calendar, and it's rising, we expect, on Thursday evening. So once that paperwork is lodged, before political opponents or the media get to see it, some logistical things have to happen. These hard copy pieces of paper with signatures and birth certificates and what have you have to be scanned and uploaded, redacted in some cases. They need to remove signatures, etc., and sensitive personal information. It then has to be uploaded to the Parliament House website, and we're told that that will take a period of time. There are 148 members in the Parliament at the moment, normally 150, and this will take at least 24 hours. So from Tuesday night, when the paperwork goes in, through to at least Wednesday evening, the race will be on to try and make this material visible, because only then, only when you see the evidence, is it available to political opponents in the House of Reps to rise and seek referrals to the High Court. I don't think you can reasonably do it without some evidence that their paperwork is incomplete or it's a trail that is less than convincing as to their citizenship. So this is the uncertainty that we roll into as we enter this final sitting week.
Gosh, time is ticking. Now, Prime Minister Turnbull, of course, this week has made a U-turn, and he's now called for a royal commission into the banking sector. The questions are grave. Was this prompted by a sincere need to reform the industry, or was it really political circumstances that forced his hand?
Well, even in the government's own mind, by that I mean the central members of cabinet, this was not something they wanted, not even something they felt necessary. They just were forced into it by their own admission. But that's politics. You can be critical of the backflips, and it's the media's job to hold them to account when they occur. But this one was so naked, so transparent, that they really had no choice. There was a backbench revolt that would have forced one on them. And as the point was subsequently made, one which they would have found completely unwieldy, as they felt that had the backbench and the Parliament inflicted a royal commission or a banking commission of inquiry on them, it would have been basically set up by Labor, even with Greens' influence as well. They would have lost control of it completely. So as a salvage exercise, I think they would feel that they got something out of it, even though it's not what they wanted. There are some big questions, though, that arise from all of this about discipline and just how much further these rebel backbenchers are prepared to go over the next 18 months. Will this government run its course?
Well, exactly. The Liberal Party does seem to, the coalition does seem to be in chaos at the moment. You mentioned a little earlier that the Nats will want to be campaigning on the national brand, given that the Liberal brand seems to be quite poisonous. The Liberal Party is in chaos.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable for them. Quite obviously, no one, not even the Prime Minister, I suspect, would sugarcoat this relationship at the moment. So we'll leave Liberals to one side, but certainly that relationship with the Nationals in the Parliament, with its numbers so tight as this one is, you can ill afford one or two people to be muttering about floor crossing or going independent. Yet there were no fewer than 3 or 4 in this category last week. And you get the sense, going back to Barnaby Joyce, that they were really exploiting the absence of a strong leader. I wonder if they would have been as rebellious as they were this last week had Barnaby Joyce been in Canberra to keep them in check or to crack the whip. I think there was a lot of opportunism on display this week. It weakened the government. It made the Treasurer and the Prime Minister just look silly when they had to complete this backflip on the Royal Commission. But as I say, rolling into the last week, they will hope that the dynamic is somewhat different. And even if his result is not yet declared, Barnaby Joyce will probably wash up in Canberra anyway, awaiting his swearing in.
As always, Greg, it's fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, and yet again, the mass media has contrived to say nothing at all about the secret issue behind Barnaby Joyce's campaign, which was how he managed to keep it secret from his voter base in northern New South Wales, which is a fairly conservative, family values, moral majority style of an electorate. He managed to conceal from them the story of the girlfriend in Canberra, that he got pregnant, his office staffer in Canberra, that he got pregnant. I asked him about how his girlfriend was going on Monday on camera. You can see that in the video, Barnaby Joyce getting heckled and badgered in Glen Innes. That apparently annoyed him to the point where he went from Glen Innes to Inverell, and at the Graham pub, somebody else who was also wearing a hat asked Barnaby about these personal issues, and Barnaby got so cranky he knocked the fella's hat off before somebody pulled him away and got him outside there. The Glen Innes Examiner's Facebook page was shown to me on Friday afternoon, and it has a big long article about it. The bloke who got his hat knocked off was interviewed. He had bumped into Barnaby a couple of times in a couple of other places, and therefore Barnaby considered him a stalker and reported him to the federal police. And Barnaby claims that his personal life is his personal life. And fair enough, if Barnaby had have been an avowed polygamist, if he thought, as his philosophy, that it was okay to have 2 wives and 3 girlfriends and 4 kids to each, and I know people who are a bit like that, it would be his personal life, and it wouldn't matter if he got his office painted secretary pregnant in Canberra while his wife and 4 girls were living in Tamworth. However, Barnaby Joyce went to St Ignatius Riverview, and he's made that a big part of his platform politically, is that he's a family values, moral majority, Christian, conservative values man. And coming during the same-sex marriage survey, plebiscite, whatever it was, the idea that the press would keep it secret from Barnaby's electorate, the fact that he got his office staffer pregnant because he's entitled to his personal life, when I would suspect that 30 to 50% of the people who voted for Barnaby, in their ignorance, would not have voted for him if they'd known that he's actually a lowhound. You know, a man who has no more self-discipline than a puppy dog, doomed to go sniffing around the tail of any bitch he thinks might be in heat. Barnaby Joyce is a lowhound, is he not? And this was kept from the electorate. So yeah, Barnaby got an increased majority because 16 people went up against him, and they divided up the anti-Barnaby vote into 16 different directions. So yeah, Barnaby Joyce is back, and he's got an increased majority. But the story has got out among the people who pay attention to such stuff, and it'll work its way back through the National Party. And I don't think he will stay very popular for very long, because they don't like hypocrites. You know, that's just the way it is. Everybody knows that politicians tend to be a bit corrupt, but Barnaby pushes all of the limits way too far with his $40,000 cheque that he took and then had to give back from and to Gina Rinehart. He looks too much like somebody who gets paid to play the way his mates want him to play. $8 billion worth of water in the Murray-Darling Basin. $1.8 billion worth of water has gone missing. Barnaby Joyce's mates, the irrigationists and the salinationists and the erosionists, know where it went. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.